Hey academic weapons, and welcome back to Student Express Review. Today we're tackling APUSH Unit 5, which covers the periods 1848 to 1877. We're going to be talking about the end of the Reconstruction era, the Civil War, and everything in between. It's the era where America tears itself apart, and then eventually will piece itself back together, so there's a lot of stuff going on here. So the road to the Civil War, 1848 to 1861. There's a lot of stuff happening, and the US just picked up a huge chunk of land after the Mexican-American War, and General Zachary Taylor, a Whig, gets elected. Remember, the Federalist Party no longer exists. But there's a problem. Should slavery expand into the new territories? So there's three positions here that you need to know. 1. A free soiler is someone who does not want slavery in the Mexican territory. Pro-slavery everywhere was the other stance, the opposite of that, which is that slavery should extend to all US territories and states. And then the most popular one was popular sovereignty, which was let the voters decide what goes on in each territory. And tension is starting to build, and you have things like the Underground Railroad going on, which is helping runaway slave escape. So the South actually wants stricter fugitive slave laws to make runaways harder to hide and easier to catch, and they do. And there's a big issue where people from the South are going into the quote free states and are bringing back the slaves who had run away. And then we have California, which is fresh off the gold rush, and they apply as a free state in 1850. But that would throw off the free versus slave balance in the Senate. So we have the Compromise of 1850. California is going to enter free, and Millard Fillmore is currently the president. So you have California entering free, and the rest of the Mexican secession is open to popular sovereignty. Slave trade is also abolished in DC, but slavery is not abolished itself. And then you have those stricter fugitive slave laws, which we were talking about. This only wraps up the sectional tension within the states. There's also a culture war going on. We have things like Uncle Tom's Cabin, which Harriet Beecher Stowe publishes this book, and it turns slavery into a moral issue, and it appeals to the northern readers, while the southern calls it propaganda. So now you're only increasing the tension between the North and the South. The North feels compassion for the people, and then the South, of course, is going to call that propaganda, and that is not true, that those conditions are not true. That is much different than that. Politics, everyone's favorite topic. So what's going on with politics? As I mentioned earlier, in 1854, the Republican Party is founded. It's anti-slavery and filled with a lot of ex-Whigs because the Whig Party does not last long, and it quickly becomes the main opposition to the Democratic Party. And then you also have the short-lived Know-Nothing Party. We also have the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which blows up the old Missouri Compromise. If you remember, that was 3630 from 1820. And what that does, it allows slavery by popular sovereignty. It sparks Bleeding Kansas, where border ruffians and anti-slavery settlers wage mini wars. You see John Brown raid pro-slavery towns and even shipping rifles disguised as Bibles. You also have violence in Congress. In 1856, Southern Congressman Preston Brooks beats Northern Senator Charles Sumner with a cane on the Senate floor over slavery insults. And, of course, Charles Sumner will become the hero of this and the victim. And then we have the election of 1856, which is Fremont versus Buchanan, and Buchanan, the Democrat, does win, but the country is only boiling over and is angrier than ever. In 1857, we have the Dred Scott decision, which is extremely important. It basically says Dred Scott was a slave, brought into the free states, and he sues for his freedom. The Supreme Court says 3 things. 1. Blacks aren't citizens and cannot sue in federal court. 2. Slaves are property and can be taken anywhere. 3. The Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional. So, what comes out of this? Is there really a such thing as a free state? In 1858, you have the Lincoln-Douglas debate, which is they debate the popular sovereignty in the famous Freeport Doctrine exchange. Douglas wins, but Lincoln's national profile skyrockets, which will eventually allow him to take the presidency. With John Brown, we have John Brown, one major thing at Harper's Ferry. 1859 is where John Brown tries to seize a federal arsenal to arm slaves for a revolt. But he's captured, tried, and executed. So now he's seen as a martyr for Northern abolitionists. The election of 1860 and the succession. Lincoln wins as a Republican with all Northern support, and Southern Democrats are split. They are panicked. They split between two different candidates, and is one of the reasons why Lincoln was able to walk away with his victory. So, in response, in 1860, South Carolina secedes. And then in 1861, you have 6 more states, and they can form the Confederate States of America under President Jefferson Davis. Lincoln takes office in March 4th and adopts a don't provoke stance, which means just let it boil out. Hopefully everything will work out. But alas, it does not. We have the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. On the screen you see Fort Sumter, which falls to the Confederate forces in South Carolina. There are no deaths, but this is seen as the beginning of the war in April 1861. You also have more states that are joining either joining the Union or the Confederacy. There's border states that actually stay in the Union. One of them is Maryland. You have Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, and West Virginia. Although Maryland is technically a southern state, this is why a lot of people view it as a northern state, because they stayed with the Union. You also have some advantages and disadvantages here, right? On both sides of the war. The Union, you have the advantage of being a larger population. It's also more industrial. If you're going to remember, the South focuses on this planter aristocracy, while the North is focused on a lot of ports and shipping and factories. You also have a larger food supply, railroads, and African American soldiers. The Confederacy has the home field advantage, and they have stronger generals and high morale. And there's some key turning points in this war. We have the Battle of Antietam in 1862, which prevents Confederate recognition by Britain and France. This is huge. Because they don't recognize the Confederate States of America as legitimate, that means that the support will likely be given to the Americans, or at least, at the very least, people won't be helping the Confederate States of America. And you have the Emancipation Proclamation, effective January 1st, 1863, which frees the slaves in the rebel territory. You have the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, which is a high watermark of the Confederacy. You have Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which redefines the war's purpose. You also have the Sherman March in 64, which is total war. Sherman destroys everything, burns multiple towns to the ground, and destroys the whole southern infrastructure. And then you also have the Appomattox Courthouse in 1865, which is where General Lee surrenders. And then, of course, April 14th, that same year, we have Lincoln is assassinated by John Wilkes. So, the Reconstruction era. What is going on here? We have the Reconstruction posed huge questions. How do we rebuild the South? And how do we integrate freed slaves, and who's going to run it? The president or Congress? So we have Lincoln's plan. Lincoln's plan is the 10% plan, lenient and quick unification. The Republican plan wanted to punish the South, and they wanted civil rights to be protected. After Lincoln's death, you have Andrew Johnson, which was a Southern Unionist, and he takes the lenient approach and pardons many Confederates and allows for black codes. At this time, we also have the Freedmen's Bureau, which became a political flashpoint and gave legal aid to freed men and provided food and education to them. On the screen, you can see the Freedmen's Bureau here. Now we have some important rights, laws, and amendments. You have the 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery. You have the 14th Amendment, which provides citizenship and equal protection under law. You have the 15th Amendment, which provides voting rights for black men. Remember, we are not quite yet for women's rights movement. We have military reconstruction, which divides the South into 5 military districts until they have compliance with the North. Some important things, we have some opposition here. We have carpetbaggers, who Northerners seen as exploiting the South. We have scalawags, which is Southern Reconstruction supporters. And then we have the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and voter intimidation. Basically, going to the voting booths and forcing people to vote a certain way. which will lead to a lot of different things being passed that are either pro-South or pro-North. And then we have the Johnson impeachment, which was the end of the really the end of the Reconstruction era. The election of 1876 led to the Compromise of 1877, which is Rutherford B. Hayes becomes president, federal troops are withdrawn from the South, and Reconstruction era ends in 1877, and the Jim Crow era begins. That is the end of APUSH Unit 5. Next up will be APUSH Unit 6, where we'll break into the Gilded Age of America. It's a very politics dominated, and you'll learn about the fella on the screen. Absolutely interesting guy with the city bosses and political machines. We do have some questions coming up though. If you'd like to stay tuned for that, please do. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video. All right, let's do some quick multiple choice practice. Which of the following was a direct consequence of the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854? A. The expansion of the Missouri Compromise line further west. B. The immediate admission of Kansas as a free state. C. A violent struggle between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers in Kansas. And D. The direct founding of the Whig Party. The answer here is going to be C. We know the Kansas-Nebraska Act led to a lot of violence. People were flocking in from different states to vote for either pro-slavery or pro-free policies. And it caused a huge clash and only led to more sectional tension. Which of the following was included in the Compromise of 1877 that ended the Reconstruction era? The ratification of the 15th Amendment. Removal of federal troops from the South. Immediate statehood for the Dakota Territory. Military occupation of 5 southern districts. We know that the answer here is B. The end of Reconstruction is going to see the removal of federal troops from the South. We're not going to see them be occupied, so we can rule out D. The end of Reconstruction sees the removal and sees the South being basically way more enveloped back into the Union. Now, a little bit of stimulus. In a fictional 1854 newspaper editorial from St. Louis, the author argues that the newest legislation opens the heartland of America to fair settlement and self-government, and insists that residents alone should decide whether slavery will be allowed. The editorial praises Senator Stephen A. Douglas for his leadership and dismisses criticism from Northern abolitionists. The legislation described in the editorial above most directly led to which of the following outcomes? A. The expansion of the Missouri Compromise line to the Pacific Ocean. B. Increased migration of both pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers to a territory, resulting in violent conflict. C. The immediate congressional admission of Kansas as a slave state. And D. The Supreme Court ruling that Kansas lacked the authority to ban slavery in any territory. Now, we're going to see things here. In the newspaper, we see that residents alone should decide where slavery will be allowed or not. So let's look at our answer choices. We're using the direct quote and we're comparing that to our answer choices. We know it's not A from the previous question. We know it's not D because this mentions nothing about a ruling from the Supreme Court or banning slavery. This is about being able to vote for slavery. So we know the answer here is going to be B, because a direct result of this was that people again migrated into these territories, which caused a lot of violence, and which was why the author argued that residents alone should decide whether slavery should be allowed or not. Well, that's all the stimulus we have for Unit 5. So thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment if you're interested in learning more. Hey Vaughn, real quick, I just realized I didn't talk about the resources, so I'm gonna do that real quick, okay? Before we dive in, make sure to check out some of our supplemental resources available in the PayHip, which will be linked in the description. If you need more practice, you can see some of the examples on screen. We offer a wide variety of multiple choice, SAQ, FRQ questions, which have answers and explanations for them.